Story 1. The Unseen Tenant. In the quiet suburbs of a small American town, the Harper family lived in a sprawling, colonial-style house that had stood for generations. Its creaky wooden floors and cavernous basement were as much a part of its charm as its history. For as long as 16-year-old Ethan Harper could remember, their tabby cat Cosmo had been relegated to the basement every night. It was a ritual born of necessity. His parents, fastidious about cleanliness, couldn't stand the thought of cat hair clinging to their pristine bedding. The basement, vast and cluttered with old furniture, seemed like a kingdom for Cosmo, who roamed its shadows with the confidence of a lion. But as autumn painted the town in hues of amber and crimson, something changed. Cosmo, once content in his nocturnal domain, began to act strangely, and the Harper household would soon uncover a chilling secret lurking beneath their home. It started subtly. One crisp October evening, Ethan carried Cosmo to the basement landing, a small platform at the top of the stairs, just behind the heavy oak door. He set the cat down gently, as he had done countless times, and closed the door with a soft click. But as he filled his water glass in the kitchen, a faint, insistent meowing echoed from the basement door. Ethan froze, the glass halfway to his lips. Cosmo never lingered on the landing. He always descended the stairs to claim his favorite armchair or sofa. Puzzled, Ethan opened the door, only to see Cosmo dart past him, eyes wide, as if fleeing an unseen predator. Ethan checked the cat's food dish. It was brimming with kibble. Shrugging it off as a quirk, he retrieved Cosmo from the living room, returned him to the landing, and shut the door again. But the unease lingered, a faint prickling at the back of his neck. The next few nights followed the same unsettling pattern. Cosmo would meow plaintively from the landing, refusing to descend the stairs. Ethan, growing increasingly concerned, began to wonder if age was catching up with the old cat. Cosmo was nearly 12 after all, but the cat's behavior wasn't the only oddity. Ethan's father, Tom, began grumbling about the basement door being left ajar, letting cool air escape from the air-conditioned space. "Air conditioning isn't cheap," he'd bellow, casting accusing glances at Ethan's younger sister, Lily, notorious for leaving doors and drawers open. Lily denied it, but the complaints persisted, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One night, Ethan woke with a start, his room cloaked in darkness, save for the faint glow of a lamp in the den. His heart thudded as he noticed a silhouette in his doorway, a tall, motionless figure, its outline stark against the dim light. "Lily?" he called, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it glided silently out of view, leaving Ethan's pulse racing. Too exhausted to investigate, he pulled the covers over his head and willed himself back to sleep, convincing himself it was just his sister playing a prank. Days later, the truth began to unravel. Ethan noticed Cosmo's refusal to enter the house altogether. The cat, once eager to slip inside for meals, now lingered on the doorstep, eyes wary, as if sensing a threat within. One evening, Ethan found Cosmo curled up on the doormat, unmoving even as he approached. He petted the cat, coaxing him inside, but Cosmo's reluctance was palpable. That night, Ethan let Cosmo sleep in his room, a small act of defiance against his parents' rules. The cat seemed calmer, but the peace was short-lived. The basement door continued to be found open, and Tom's frustration grew. Ethan, meanwhile, couldn't ignore Cosmo's escalating fear. Then came the discovery that turned their world upside down. The basement was infested with fleas. The family was horrified. Cosmo had always worn a flea collar, and their home had never faced such a problem. Tom tore through the basement, vacuuming carpets, spraying chemicals, and washing every surface with ruthless determination. The family was instructed to avoid the basement for days to ensure the fleas died off. Ethan assumed this explained Cosmo's behavior, but a nagging doubt gnawed at him. Fleas didn't account for the silhouette in his doorway or the persistent opening of the basement door. One night, as Ethan lay in bed, a flickering light caught his eye, seeping under his door like a restless spirit. It pulsed on and off, as if someone were toying with the hallway switch. His breath caught in his throat. He told himself it was his father, perhaps checking the house. But the flickering continued, erratic and unnatural. Fear rooted him to his bed, his eyes locked on the sliver of light until, mercifully, it stopped. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the sense that something was watching him. When Tom declared the basement clear, Ethan eagerly returned to his video game setup downstairs. But as he descended the stairs, a chill ran through him. Fleas still skittered across the carpet, defying the thorough cleaning. Confused and alarmed, Ethan called his father, who dismissed it as a lingering issue that would soon resolve. But Ethan wasn't convinced. The next day, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, he ventured into the basement's storage room, a cluttered space filled with dusty boxes and forgotten tools. As he approached the far end, a foul odor hit him, a thick, rancid stench that made his stomach churn. It emanated from an unfinished crawl space, a dark, narrow passage tied to the house's plumbing. Ethan hesitated, the darkness of the crawl space swallowing the light from his phone's flashlight. The smell grew stronger, oppressive, as if something had died within. He turned to grab a flashlight from the storage room when a sound stopped him cold. Breathing. It was faint but unmistakable, a steady rasping inhale and exhale from the depths of the crawl space. Ethan's blood turned to ice. The breathing grew louder, closer, and before he could react, a figure lunged from the shadows. A gaunt, filthy hand reached for him, its nails crusted with grime. Ethan stumbled back, heart pounding, and sprinted upstairs, slamming the basement door behind him. His trembling fingers dialed 911. The police arrived swiftly, their flashlights cutting through the basement's gloom. They found no one, but the crawl space held chilling evidence. Empty food wrappers, crumpled chip bags, and a tattered blanket, signs of habitation. The storm door at the back of the basement hung slightly ajar, suggesting the intruder's escape. The officers theorized it was a homeless person seeking shelter, but Ethan couldn't shake the image of that hand, the sound of that breathing. His parents, shaken, installed new locks and a security system, but Cosmo never approached the basement door again. Ethan, too, felt the weight of unseen eyes, a lingering fear that whoever or whatever had lived beneath their home might return, watching from the shadows. Story 2: The Masked Intruder. In the historic town of Easton, Pennsylvania, where brick houses stood like silent sentinels of a bygone era, 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell lived with her doting parents in a grand, slightly eerie home. The house, with its creaking floors and shadowy hallways, seemed tailor-made for spooky tales, especially around Halloween. Every year, Sarah's parents transformed their basement into a haunted house, a charitable endeavor that drew families from across the neighborhood. For a donation of canned food, visitors could brave the flickering strobe lights, fake cobwebs, and jump scares orchestrated by Sarah's cousins. It was a tradition Sarah adored, a night of laughter and chills that made her feel like the star of her own adventure. But one Halloween, when Sarah was 7, the haunted house became the stage for a nightmare that would haunt her for years. That year, the preparations were grander than ever. Sarah's cousins, Jeff, Rick, Chaz, and Eric, arrived days early, brimming with mischievous energy. They decided to up the ante, donning identical anonymous masks, their blank white faces and eerie smiles perfect for startling, unsuspecting guests. Sarah, too young to fully grasp the mask's cultural weight, found them thrillingly creepy. As Halloween approached, the basement buzzed with activity. Her parents hung tattered sheets to create a maze, rigged speakers to emit ghostly moans, and scattered plastic skeletons for effect. Flyers circulated at Sarah's school and beyond, promising a spooky spectacle for a good cause. By the night of the event, the Mitchells' driveway was lined with cars and the air hummed with excitement. The haunted house opened at dusk, and soon the basement was a whirlwind of screams and giggles. Sarah darted through the maze with her friends, their flashlights casting wild shadows on the walls. Her cousins, hidden in alcoves, leaped out with theatrical roars, their masks glinting under the strobe lights. The crowd was a mix of familiar faces, parents and kids from Sarah's school, and a few strangers drawn by the flyers. Among them was a man who arrived early, before the chaos began. He was alone, which struck Sarah's mother, Ellen, as odd, since the event was family-oriented. He carried a bag of canned goods, explaining that his wife and daughter would join later. Ellen, ever welcoming, thanked him, but his lingering gaze and hesitant departure left her uneasy. As the night wore on, the basement grew crowded, the air thick with the scent of popcorn and nervous sweat. Sarah was in her element, leading her friends through the maze, when one of them, a girl named Mia, ran to her in tears. "Someone grabbed me," Mia sobbed, clutching her wrist. "He was wearing one of those masks, and he tried to pull me into a closet." Sarah's heart sank. She reassured Mia it was probably one of her cousins, but Mia's fear was raw, her eyes wide with panic. Uneasy, Sarah led Mia to her parents, who listened with growing concern. Ellen and her husband, David, descended into the basement, their faces tense. They questioned Jeff, Rick, and Chaz, who were stationed at their posts, masks still in place. Each swore they hadn't touched anyone, their voices earnest. But then David noticed something chilling. Eric was missing. The basement fell silent as the realization hit. Just as panic set in, Eric burst through the basement door, breathless. "My mask is gone," he gasped. He'd stepped upstairs for a bathroom break, only to return and find his anonymous mask missing. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Someone else was in the haunted house, wearing Eric's mask. David and Ellen acted swiftly, ushering everyone out and shutting down the event. The police arrived, their flashlights sweeping the basement's corners, but found no trace of the intruder. The night ended in a haze of fear, and Sarah, though shaken, fell asleep, believing the worst was over. But in the dead of night, a soft tapping woke her. It came from her bedroom window, a rhythmic, deliberate sound that sent chills down her spine. Frozen with fear, she lay still, praying it would stop. It did, and she drifted back to sleep, only to be roused hours later by a new sound. Scratching, urgent, and insistent, like nails clawing at the window frame. Terror gave way to a surge of courage. Sarah threw off her covers, heart pounding, and yanked open the curtains. Her scream pierced the night as she met the gaze of a figure just inches from the glass, its face hidden behind an anonymous mask. The blank eyes seemed to bore into her soul. Her parents rushed in, but by the time they reached the window, the figure had vanished. The police searched the yard, but found no footprints, no signs of intrusion. The night passed in a blur of fear and sleeplessness. Months later, life seemed to return to normal. The haunted house became a cautionary tale, and Sarah's parents bolstered their home's security with cameras and alarms. But one afternoon, Sarah returned from school to find a sight that reignited her terror. An anonymous mask lay on her bed, identical to those her cousins had worn. Scrawled across its forehead in black Sharpie was her name. The police were called, but the investigation yielded nothing. The Mitchells tightened their security further, but Sarah never felt safe in her room again. She'd lie awake, listening for the tapping, the scratching, convinced the masked figure knew her, watched her, and might return. Years later, as an adult, Sarah moved away, but the memory of that mask and the question of how its wearer knew her name lingered like a shadow she could never outrun. Story 3, The Basement Secret. In a gritty corner of a small Midwestern town, where neon signs flickered over tired storefronts, 22-year-old Jake Sullivan took a job at El Fuego, a Mexican restaurant known for its cheap tacos and questionable clientele. The gig wasn't glamorous. Late-night shifts, greasy floors, and a manager, Carlos, whose shifty demeanor set Jake's nerves on edge. But with bills piling up and no better prospects, Jake had little choice. He told himself the night shifts would give him days to chase his music dreams, but the restaurant's eerie atmosphere and Carlos's cryptic behavior soon made him question his decision. What began as a job to pay the rent would spiral into a nightmare that would change Jake's life forever. El Fuego was a squat, cinder block building on the edge of town, its faded paint peeling under the weight of years. The dining area was dimly lit, with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in decades. The kitchen, where Jake spent most of his shifts, was a maze of stainless steel and flickering fluorescent lights. Carlos, a wiry man with a perpetual smirk, ran the place with a mix of charm and menace. He scheduled Jake for the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., and often kept him late, citing extra cleaning that never seemed necessary. Jake sensed Carlos was hiding something, but he needed the money too badly to push back. The first sign of trouble came a week into the job. Jake was mopping the kitchen floor, the restaurant silent save for the hum of the walk-in freezer, when a strange sound broke the stillness. It was faint at first, a muffled thud followed by a scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across concrete. The sound seemed to come from beneath the floor, rhythmic and deliberate. Jake paused, mop in hand, his breath catching. The restaurant was old. Maybe it was just pipes settling or an animal trapped in the crawl space. But the noises continued, growing louder, more insistent, before abruptly stopping. Uneasy, Jake finished his tasks and left, chalking it up to his imagination. The noises returned the next night and the night after that, always when the restaurant was quiet. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. They seemed to follow a pattern, as if someone or something was moving below. Jake's unease grew, but when he mentioned it to Carlos, the manager's reaction was dismissive. "Old building," Carlos said, waving a hand. "Pipes, rats, whatever. Don't worry about it." But his eyes darted away, and Jake caught a flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or guilt. When Jake pressed, pointing out the window wells outside that suggested a basement, Carlos's tone sharpened. "There's no basement. Sealed off years ago. Focus on your job, kid." Jake wasn't convinced. The window wells, half buried in the gravel behind the restaurant, were undeniable proof of a lower level. He considered dropping it. Carlos's warning had an edge that made Jake's stomach twist, but the noises persisted, gnawing at his sanity. One night, unable to resist, he slipped outside after closing, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He crouched by a window well, peering through the grimy glass. The basement was pitch black, an abyss that swallowed his light. Just as he turned to leave, a flicker of light sparked inside, brief but unmistakable, before plunging back into darkness. Jake's heart raced. Someone was down there. He didn't tell Carlos. The manager's evasiveness, coupled with the light, made Jake wary. But curiosity outweighed fear, and the next night he returned to the window well, his hands trembling as he aimed his flashlight. The glass was fogged with age, but as he leaned closer, a face appeared, pressed against the window, inches from his own. It was a man, his features twisted and wild, his hair matted with filth. His yellowed eyes locked onto Jake's, wide and unblinking, as a demented grin spread across his face. He slammed his head against the glass, the impact reverberating through Jake's bones. Jake screamed, stumbling back, and sprinted to his car, his keys slipping in his shaking hands. He peeled out of the lot. The man's face burned into his mind. The next day, Jake confronted Carlos, his voice shaking with rage and fear. To his shock, Carlos didn't deny it. Instead, he slumped into a chair, his usual bravado gone, and confessed. The man was his brother, Miguel, a drifter with severe mental illness. Carlos had been hiding him in the basement, a space sealed off from public access, but accessible through a hidden hatch. Miguel was dangerous, Carlos admitted, prone to violent outbursts, but Carlos couldn't bear to turn him over to authorities. "He's family," Carlos said, his voice breaking. He begged Jake to stay quiet, promising to handle it. Jake, torn between fear and financial desperation, agreed, but the decision weighed heavily on him. For weeks, Jake worked in a haze of paranoia, avoiding the back of the restaurant and jumping at every sound. He told himself Miguel was contained, that Carlos would keep him in check. But one night, as Jake locked up, he sensed a presence. In the tree line beyond the parking lot, a figure lurked, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Jake's gut twisted. He knew it was Miguel. Pretending not to notice, he walked to his car, his heart pounding. Then he heard it. Footsteps, uneven but fast, closing in. Jake glanced back, and there was Miguel hobbling toward him, his face a mask of manic intent. Jake fumbled with his keys, his breath ragged. He threw himself into the car just as Miguel reached the door, slamming his face against the window. Dirt and sweat smeared the glass as Miguel pounded, his eyes wild with something beyond reason. Jake screamed, the engine roaring to life as he sped away, the restaurant shrinking in his rearview mirror. He called the police from his apartment, recounting everything, but refused to return. The job, the money, none of it was worth his life. Jake never learned what became of Carlos or Miguel. The police investigated, but he stayed far away, haunted by the thought that Miguel might still be out there, watching. Sometimes late at night, Jake would wake to the sound of footsteps outside his apartment, only to find nothing. He'd moved on, found a new job, but the memory of that face pressed against the glass followed him like a shadow. El Fuego was just a building, but to Jake, it was a reminder that some secrets are better left buried, and that some doors once opened can never be closed.